Hello, and welcome to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. I'm Jim Paolino, founder and CEO of Lodestar Software Solutions. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to leaders in the mortgage and real estate industries. Our goal is to talk about current events, interesting things from their end of the industry, and anything else that we feel is fascinating. Our guest today is a very good friend of mine, Krystal Thomas. She's the Senior Specialist for Industry Relations and Member Engagement at the Mortgage Bankers Association. Had to make sure I get that one right, Krystal. In effect, Krystal and I know each other throughout the years of my involvement at the MBA and conferences, and she is very involved in the Impact Young Mortgage Professionals group, as well as a lot of the diversity and inclusion initiatives going on at the MBA, which she is going to describe well better than I ever could. So we're going to start there and go from here.
That sounds great. You did a fantastic job. That was a great summary.
Thank you. We're here to build self-esteem, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, just to tell you a little bit more about myself. So I've been at the MBA for about 5 years now, which is shocking. I feel like time just seems to fly, especially within our industry. But in my role, like Jim said, I have the privilege of being able to work on a lot of different things. So I work on our state relations initiative. And so what that is as a national MBA, that represents all aspects of housing. We've got lenders, we've got different partnerships. We've got banks that we partner with. There's just a whole tech companies. There's a bunch of people that we collaborate with, as you know, because our industry is very dynamic and touches everything. And so part of that, as we're talking mainly about advocacy, we realized that there was a need to also have a lot of collaboration with our state and local associations around the country. There are things that are happening within the states, as you know, with COVID and the pandemic. There's a lot of things that are happening, and so it's extremely important while we are a nationally based organization, that we have these strong partnerships. And so I help manage that partnership. In addition to that, like Jim mentioned, I also work with Impact, which is our Young Professionals Network, now almost 2,500 and strong, very proud to say, but young professionals from all aspects of the industry and all across the country who are involved in our industry. And our focus is mainly just to keep them engaged. And then lastly, I do a lot of work with our diversity and inclusion initiatives, both internally and externally. I know we're going to get into some of the things we've been working on later on. But yes, that, as you guys know, is an ever growing and ever expanding industry and field. And just the position of MBA, we really feel, it is our calling to really be the voice of the industry when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Wow, it seems like every time I talk to you, there's a new project, a new initiative, a new title or something.
Keeps it exciting,
Yeah.
right, Jim?
And you mentioned kind of being involved at the MBA for 5 years. In the last year, especially, what have been the biggest concern, especially as you're dealing with state associations? Like, what specific elements are the largest hurdle? Like, I've seen in New Jersey that at the beginning of 2020, there was a law that didn't enable loan officers to work remotely because they were considered fiduciaries. So there was a lot of overnight legislation like that. Like, what other kind of things have you been seeing across the country?
Yeah, so again, our industry is one that never sleeps. And so I'm going to flip it because I'm an optimistic person. I will say there have been a lot of challenges, but I've been very inspired by the resiliency of our industry and the people that make it up. So we're still pursuing RON, remote online notarization. We're noticing that there are some states that are starting to embody more RIN, which is remote ink notarization. And where that's a little bit problematic is that RON, there are certain steps in place that just ensure that minimize risk, and that will help. Of course, with lending, you want to be able to sell a loan and be able to originate. So there were already structures built in place with RON that we're not seeing in the same way with RIN. You brought up MLO licensing flexibility. And so we've been still pursuing that, making sure that we are working with all of the different stakeholders to come up with regulations that are going to be lasting. Right now, there's been a lot of great solutions in the meantime as we're responding to the pandemic, but we know that, there could be another disaster, another pandemic. And so wanting to make sure that we have not only short-term solutions, but also long-term.
And how likely do you think a lot of these changes that I think were probably catalyzed over the last year, how much of this is going to stick in the long run?
Hmm. I will say, as the MBA, and I can't speak for everything. I can only speak in what's the world of Krystal
Mhm.
Thomas, which Jim mentioned is ever expanding, and I love. I can say that MBA is very sure and strong when advocating for lasting solutions,
Mhm.
and so part of that goes into having those strategic partnerships, collaborating and working with our
Mhm.
stakeholders to come up with sustainable solutions.
Mhm. I mean, and also really goes in line with MPAC in terms of getting that next generation of mortgage professionals in the industry. I always laugh. I think the mortgage industry more so than others. You're a young mortgage professional if you're 40 or under, so it's a
Yep.
big tent. If there's anyone out there who would apply, please reach out to myself. Please reach out to Krystal. We love to have you in the group. It's a fun group, and I've enjoyed being a part of it.
Yeah, it's been great. I will say, we just had a new member join our team, Jackie. She's
Mhm.
going to be representing on the commercial multifamily side. So happy to
Mhm.
have another addition to the team.
Yeah,
But Impact, and Jim already knows this, but I'll continue to share. Impact
please
started
do.
back in 2015,
Mhm.
when especially on the commercial multifamily side, there were a lot of young professionals who noticed, we're going to these conferences, we're making these deals, but there are not a lot of people who look like us. So how do we create a
Mhm.
space for young professionals to truly thrive in this industry? And through that success, that led us to Impact. That group being rebranded as Impact when we incorporated residential side to that. And before the pandemic, we were doing regional events around the country,
Mhm.
um, events around conferences focused on industry knowledge, so helping young professionals coming into the knowledge industry gain that job knowledge, being able to connect with their peers and also leaders of the industry. And we also provided programming that provided a lot of those foundational skills. So
Mhm.
increasing brand visibility, building your brand,
Mhm.
what's your social media presence. Um, and then after, now that we're in the pandemic and everything is virtual, which Jim, I really miss being in-person conferences so much.
Yeah, me
But
too.
that caused us to adapt and be
Mhm.
flexible. And so part of our strategy is really about how to leverage our knowledge and our expertise as
Mhm.
young leaders who are continuing to shape this industry. And so we hosted a virtual event, navigating challenges,
Mhm.
during the pandemic, and that was phenomenal. We had leaders of the industry talking about what they've been doing, talking about the importance of still having young leaders, talking about how to still have that presence and dealing with that shift if your job was mainly going to conferences and now you're in this virtual environment. And
Mhm.
so it was just nice to be able to hear from leaders of the industry, speaking directly to young professionals, answering our questions, and creating this environment where you've got a network and
Yeah.
community backing you.
Mm. And one thing, and that I was on that virtual presentation, which I really enjoyed. And one of the things that they really pushed was the idea of coaches, the idea of mentors.
Mhm.
And one nice thing about the industry is there are a lot of people with a lot of experience who want to share that experience. So that is something that on my end, I've always been really trying to get more of and kind of find kind of the right people. And I don't know what you've seen both in your experience at the MBA, Krystal, or as well as other young professionals, how they're kind of going about that process.
Yes, yes. I'm
Mhm.
so glad that you brought that up. Um, you're gonna laugh at me a little bit, Jim, but I have to
I
share it.
can't
So
wait.
I just got certified in associate diversity coaching. I got
I saw that
approval.
on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Congratulations.
So yes, thank you. So coaching is near and dear to my
Mhm.
heart.
Mhm.
Definitely. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about our Voices series because I think that
Mhm.
kind of
Yep.
gets into when we're talking about mentoring and coaching.
Mhm.
So Voices, Courageous Conversations with Women of Color, was a virtual series that was hosted by the MBA, and the whole purpose behind this event was to create a space where we're talking about, we're having those real conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about some of the challenges, but also the opportunities and the role that everybody plays in making our industry more inclusive. And so we did a 3-part series. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the turnout for these events has been phenomenal. We wrapped up our last one on Tuesday, and part of the focus on the last series was really Together We Rise, and emphasizing the importance of having those mentors and
Mm-hmm.
those sponsors who advocate for you in the rooms that you're not there. But let me pause for a second and separate between coaches, mentors, and
Sure.
sponsors, because I
Mhm.
know that gets a little
Yeah,
tricky.
I know.
So when
I
you're thinking
bundled
of a
them together, so
mentor,
I'm glad you're making that distinction.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So when you're thinking of a mentor is going to be someone that you have more of a professional and personal relationship with. They're invested in your growth, and if
Mhm.
it's, to me, what I think of as like the most um, the most fruitful relationships are ones that are more the reverse mentoring, where not only are you learning from your mentor, but they're also learning from you, and it,
Mhm.
it develops into this organic and beautiful relationship, which allows for growth on both sides. Coaching, however, is more so if you're trying to learn a particular skill,
Mhm.
if you're trying to address a particular problem or an area. Now, don't get me wrong, with coaching can still be transformative.
Mhm.
You're addressing disempowering beliefs, you're reminding people of their own agency. And so there's
Mhm.
still meaning in coaching, but your coach is going to be more of the facilitator or the partner as you
Mhm.
work through some of the task and the areas that you want to work through. Whereas a sponsor, that's going to be the person that's advocating for you when you're not in the room. So ideally, this would be someone who you've worked with. They know your work. If they're asking, hey,
Mhm.
this project went really well. Congratulations on you for doing this. They would be the person to say, hey, well, I also want to mention that so and so was really instrumental in this, like the,
Mhm.
the 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 person that's cheering you on when you're not in the room.
So
um,
should these both be at your same organization then? How do people kind of wrap their head around
Ooh,
that?
good question.
Mhm.
So it honestly just depends. I know for me, I've been really lucky to have a lot of formal and informal mentors.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and sometimes and quite a few sponsors who are willing to cheer me on, but also
Mhm.
um, willing to acknowledge and recognize my accomplishments. I do think it's up to the individual. I do think that there are some companies, like at the MBA we have an internal mentorship program.
Mhm.
But if you're looking, mentorship and mentors are not tied to a particular company.
Mhm.
Sometimes they can be outside of the industry. I also have a couple of mentors that are based in my faith-based community, and so it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily have to be tied to your organization, but it's really about relationships when you're talking about mentorships. You want
Mhm.
someone that is going to be equally as invested in the relationship as you are, um,
Mhm.
and that you come with clear expectations um, on both sides.
Mhm.
I have two mentees myself, which is also really funny when you reach that certain age. So I just turned
Yeah.
30,
Mhm.
new day.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. But now I have people coming to me to be their mentor, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wait, I'm not like I don't have all these years of experience. I'm still figuring it out too. But that's my point of reverse mentorship, and where
Mhm.
I'm able to share what I've been learning. They're able to share what they're learning, and
Yeah.
together we're having this organic
Mhm.
relationship that's leading to
Yeah.
both of our growths.
Well, I think that's really important. I actually had a similar situation this week where I'm working with a company who's at my alma mater. It's a college sophomore who's trying to land his second client on a software business. So
Oh
I'm
wow.
mentoring, I guess advising, I think they call it mentoring, sorry. And then just I enjoy the process. I enjoy helping them in doing that. And then a day later, I had the same conversation where I was the mentee dealing with someone well further along in the process. And for me, it was really important to think of myself in that position a day ago of like, this is what I'm enjoying about this. This is a way of giving back. I just like hearing
Mhm.
about this and working on it and realizing that like, this is what this person feels like working with me. So I think having both of
Nice.
those is fun and it makes for like an interesting kind of trickle down. And I definitely feel the same way as you, when it's like, wait, someone actually like is modeling my behavior or thinking like what I did is correct. So it's I think a good place, it's a fun place to be.
Definitely. And it
Mhm.
requires authenticity. And
Yeah.
especially in a world where, we have to be virtual for a lot of things, being able to
Hmm.
have those authentic and genuine
Yeah.
conversations are so important. And so I do want to say, if you are looking for a mentor, if you are
Hmm.
looking to get connected,
Hmm.
um, and there's someone at your company who you respect and want to learn from, you can do virtual coffee dates. I've been doing
Hmm.
those. Um, if there's someone, I mean, we have LinkedIn, like reach
Yeah.
out, feel free to reach out to me. Of course, you guys can reach out to Jim.
Hmm.
Um, and don't be afraid what I love is that when we think of, a lot of times when we think of mentorships, we think it has to be this
Hmm.
person that's really prestigious and really high up. But you can have peer-to-peer mentors. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really whatever you're looking for. Um, if you are looking to grow and develop, and there's a person that is embodying what you want to do, by all means, reach
Yeah.
out.
I have someone like that who I actually was on a call with about an hour ago, and we were just, he runs a business as well. He may be a podcast guest at some point, and we were just complaining about something that we both got angry about in a different way. And it was just nice to vent about those similar struggles. So I think it
Mhm.
certainly has that type of value there of just being able to kind of have that person to talk about. One of the things I like to say a lot too is generally if you're asking someone for help, they're going to be a little standoffish. But what people love to do is give advice, especially advice that ties in with their experience. So that is always something that I have found kind of super helpful um,
Mhm.
in that regard and looking for that mentorship.
People
So
will
mhm,
offer advice whether you ask for it or not.
that's true. That is a
They give us
different type of
gifts.
problem. That's for
Yeah, the
sure.
optimist
Yeah.
gifts.
Yeah, the optimist gifts, the go giver, right? So, I do want to talk about all of the work that you're doing right now around diversity and inclusion, and I think there's certainly some segues from what you're doing with Impact for companies embracing that diversity of age, of backgrounds. Um, I think I think I was at an MBA conference and they had called the industry pale male and stale, which is always the favorite MBA line for me, the companies. So, what I'd love to hear from you is the companies that are doing a good job with this right now from a diversity inclusion perspective. What are they doing? Like, what commonalities are there for the people that you feel are succeeding right now at this, and what benefits do they get through it?
Mhm. It's a good question. I think it
Hmm.
does vary on company resources, bandwidth, structures.
Hmm.
There's a lot of different factors that go into it. Um, and also acknowledging there's different layers of diversity. We have the
Hmm.
visible diversity and the diversity that we're not necessarily able to see.
Hmm.
What I will say for specifically our younger professionals, when we're trying to think about that diversity, a lot of companies it's where I see a lot of the success happening is having a two-step approach. So the first
Hmm.
step is, okay, there's young professionals that are in your company. How are we keeping them engaged? How
Right.
are we building them up from within? Um, Knowing that not everybody can be a VP, how are we still providing value and recognition? I think
Hmm.
a lot of that goes into a lot of the research and data
Hmm.
um, around different generations. Again, I mean, they come on millennials pretty hard. I Every time I'm in these conversations, I'm like, okay, okay, we're not all lazy. Come on, guys. Uh, but it is interesting when
Yeah.
especially now with Gen Z coming in, it is interesting to
Hmm.
see um, when you're talking about recognition, when you're talking about the importance of value, when you're talking about the
Hmm.
what is important uh, to people, it's important to also keep in mind that you're developing a workplace environment that will allow all generations to thrive,
Hmm.
not just the newest generation coming in. And
Hmm.
so I do think companies that are really thriving are the ones that are creating those environments where, similar to reverse mentoring, people are
Hmm.
able to learn from one another, and
Hmm.
it's less about age and hierarchy and more about talent and
Hmm.
sharing knowledge and working towards the common goal and common vision.
Hmm.
I think the other side of that is also building out those pipelines and succession
Hmm.
planning. And so um, now that we're in this virtual place and we're not able to travel, I know with the MBA, we are partnering with Convergence Memphis, which is MBA's affordable housing initiative.
Mm-hmm.
I had the privilege of being able to help start the initiative with under the leadership of Steve O'Connor, and
Mm-hmm.
attend the first event in Memphis about a year ago, or 2 years ago now. Wow, time is just
Yeah.
flying. Being able to see again what Steve O'Connor is doing and his fantastic team about, again, being nationally based, but having strong community partners in the city of Memphis, working with lenders who are involved in the affordable housing issue, especially with bridging the Black home ownership gap. And you just see a lot of like fruitful things coming out from that team. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is also jobs and building up the pipeline. And so
Mm-hmm.
one thing that MBA's diversity and inclusion is doing is that they're partnering with Convergence Memphis to do a
Mm-hmm.
virtual career fair to help us
Oh,
bring in
wow.
the next generation of
Mm-hmm.
talent. And so you have to do both. It's not one or the other,
Yeah.
it's both and.
Mm-hmm.
We need to find ways of getting that talent
Right.
in, and equally making sure that we are keeping them engaged and building succession planning,
Mm-hmm.
where even if they're not able to be a leader now, there are clear steps. There's a clear
Mm-hmm.
vision of where they're going, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the value that they provide to the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, at least for me, and would love to hear your thoughts on this, is an important point to make in these cases is this is not, clearly it's the right thing to do, right? But it's not only the right thing to do, it's also helpful to your business in the long
Exactly.
run. And I've seen that in plenty of different areas like social impact investing. But I think the idea of bringing in a diverse set of thoughts and people and ideas, it's going to lead to a stronger business. It leads to stronger communities. Do you feel like it's hard to get that point across? Like, what do you think people are more open to that now?
I think people are more open. Where I get a little, where I think it's important to thread the needle is that
Mm,
oftentimes when we talk about um, diverse people and everything like
mm,
that, we're only typically thinking about certain aspects of diversity.
mm,
And what makes diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, because I like to include equity because
mm,
we're all starting from different places. We all have different resources, and
mm,
dealing with systems and barriers, it's important to factor in equity.
mm,
Um, Everyone plays a part in the diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion. I
mm,
feel a lot of times what ends up happening is that while business resource groups and employee resource groups are great, and they provide a lot of value, um, when you have white male staff, um, they're part of the diversity story. And oftentimes it's kind of how do we do both? And I'm going to keep stressing that it's both.
yeah.
And we create safe spaces for all people to thrive within our
Mhm,
company, and develop business resource groups that allow us to think strategically, or give a particular diverse group the opportunity to truly thrive. The important thing with business resource group and employee resource groups is that there's
mhm,
clear expectations about the groups and what their mission is and the value that they provide to the organization. And I'm a big believer in making sure anything that you're doing with DEI is tied to the business case, is tied to the central mission of the company. And if
mhm,
it is tied to the central mission of the company, it's very clear and apparent that everybody plays a part, everybody plays a role. And so if
mhm,
you're in, I think people are open to it, but there might be a little bit of fear of saying the wrong thing,
mhm.
fear of being misunderstood.
Yeah.
And so that's why when we're thinking about, like, even with voices, courageous conversations,
Mhm,
um, being willing and open to ask those questions, to lean in and not away,
mhm.
um, and be part of how we move forward as an industry.
Yeah. Absolutely. So one of the segments that we have on this podcast that my wife was actually the first guest on last week
Oh, wonderful.
is when we talk to consumers, potential home buyers, to try to get that perspective. We call it America's Next Top Home Buyer. Is our working
So
title
good.
there. And one of the points that she made was it's so important to see yourself in the process. When you're going and buying a home, and it's the most important transaction of most people's lives. And the fact that if you think of realtors, loan officers as older men in many cases. And the way that it's good for business is people want to see themselves both in who they're working with for a purchase, for buying a home, who they're working with on a daily basis. So I guess I had mentioned a little bit before about what the good companies are doing in regards to this, the companies that are successful. What is a good starting point for companies that are trying to make this a bigger initiative going forward? How can you begin that? What's the first step?
So it's not gonna. Okay, so I feel like a lot of times, best intentions, of course, best intentions.
Yep.
The thought is we're just going to create these resource groups. We're just
Right.
going to create these initiatives, but
Yeah.
there's no. You need to start
Right.
first with the data.
Yeah.
Data.
Mm-hmm.
Take the time to figure out where your baselines are.
Mm-hmm.
Take the time to see to evaluate. So, for instance, handbook policies. Is it possible that something in the policies and in the handbooks that might not necessarily be inclusive, not intentionally,
Yeah.
but let's have another look at that just to kind of see and compare it to the rest of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Creating that baseline with kind of a sense of where
Right.
employees, leadership, also board members, getting a sense of where everybody's at, because that will allow you to really be able to say, okay, this is what's informing and shaping the strategy. These are the gaps. These are the steps that we need to take. Because again, it's not something you do overnight.
Right.
Instead of you flip the switch and woohoo, we're diverse.
Yeah.
It takes time. It takes time. And so I feel a lot of the problems and the best well-intentioned programs may not be as successful or fruitful because you don't start with first creating that baseline and giving those metrics.
Right.
I will also say another important factor to have when you're kind of shaping your strategy and your viewpoints is being able, again, so like for me, part of this is because, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this.
That's
there
why
are
you're
so
here.
many there are so many trainings and so many certifications that you can do to become more familiar. So for instance, the one that I just completed was a program by Coach Diversity Institute and Howard University, and it's called the Executive Certification in Diversity Coaching. And so you have CEOs taking it, you have people like me who are developing their skills in the industry, great networking opportunity, but also just a great space to continue to learn from. And so I'd also say, in addition to creating those data and getting those metrics, if you don't have, again, diversity and inclusion and equity is not going to happen with just one person in your company.
Right.
Ideally, you would have a whole team that is working directly with senior leadership and the CEO of the company.
Yeah.
And so making sure that you're investing in those people in your company. And if you don't have those people in your company, creating opportunities and spaces for that, because it's important to make sure that you're, again, adding the value and recognizing talent within your industry and creating these opportunities, not only within your industry, within your company, but also potential external. But that it becomes more than just checking a box.
Yeah.
Your employees and those outside of your company are able to see this is a true priority of the organization. Because senior leadership is involved, resources are being allocated, and you're taking the time to really see where you're at to inform your strategy.
I think that makes sense. Obviously, having the goal in mind when you start, having that top-down approach, I think it's really important, because I was about to say checking boxes before you. All too often, people just want to, oh, we have this now, so it's fine. We have,
the positive person in me, best intention.
Right.
But this is lasting and sustainable change that we want to have, and culture shifts and addressing systematic barriers. That takes time. And data helps. Oh, one last thing, Jim. I'm so sorry. And also,
don't apologize.
When you're thank you. When you're also a lot of times when you're thinking of diversity goals, you're pulling these numbers out of your head. We want to hire X amount of people from this diverse group and blah 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 blah. Making sure you're comparing that with demographic data. And the reason why I say that is that you're basing it on the trends of what's going. So if you're in the middle of a place that's maybe not as culturally diverse,
Hmm.
saying you're just going to have this random number of people may not necessarily be a sustainable goal.
Right.
Rather, why don't we have a larger conversation about how do we expand the candidate pool
Hmm.
where are we, what are we lacking in, how can we see, like going over records of seeing who has been hired in the past, their
Hmm.
progress within the company, who's applied for these jobs in the past, where are they coming from, just
Hmm.
thinking broader, and again relying on demographic data and the
Hmm.
data that you collect within your company to really shape those
Yeah.
goals and metrics, because I do think sometimes
Hmm.
companies are not always setting realistic goals
Right.
yet, because again,
Hmm.
it's a
Well, I
multi.
think there's really important things to that point that companies can consider, and even somewhat small decisions that have big impacts. For example, what I've seen is, where are you recruiting? Where are you putting up applications? Is it somewhere that
Right.
is going to have kind of a self-selecting audience? The other thing that I saw with my company early on is everyone said, do free internships. You can get people in at no cost. It's going to be great. First off, I firmly believe that you get what you pay for, and paying anyone to work, they're going to take it more seriously. You're going to take it more seriously and get a better end result. But also, by offering a free internship, you've already dramatically limited the pool of who could come in and do something like that. So
Exactly.
something that seems so easy and such like a knee-jerk thing actually has pretty big implications.
I know. And you saw my face. I didn't hold back on that. I
Hmm. Yeah.
would always say, you can't eat experience,
Yeah.
especially being in DC. You cannot eat experience.
Yeah.
Another thing that
Hmm.
I would also mention, when
Hmm.
you're thinking about um, within your company, we now have to think about, while we are all teleworking, have parents who
Yeah.
are teaching and having their kids at home while also working full time. And so I think a lot of, when we're talking about those barriers, the
Hmm.
ability to have flexibility in work schedules, the ability or to recognize, sometimes when you schedule meetings past 5, that might be
Hmm.
challenging for people who have children, or
Hmm.
even um, adults or employees at your company that don't have children.
Hmm.
Are they taking care of their parents?
Yeah.
How are they doing emotionally and mentally? And so there's a
Hmm.
there's a lot of factors that I think we should have already been considering
Hmm.
before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has made really blatantly clear
Yeah.
that can be providing barriers from amazing and
Mm.
talented people from being involved in,
Well,
in part of our industry.
I think we can and will have to have another conversation with you about everything we talked about now doing it remotely, right? Is
Yes.
just another big problem of like mentoring, coaching. These are all well and good when you're sitting in the same office and some of this stuff, but now how are you dealing with this culture when everyone's in a different place? So
Right.
that's something we will have to put in for another day. The last question I had for you was
Mhm.
something you mentioned at the beginning about missing in-person conferences, which I do dearly as well right now. How do you see the future of conferences, um, not only at the national level, but with a lot of state associations that you're working with? Are they rethinking what these are going to be like going forward, or waiting for the dust to settle?
Yes. So again, stressing the resiliency of our
Mhm.
industry and just
Mm.
seeing how adaptable um, everybody's been. It's truly inspiring.
Mhm.
So I know for me, speaking of my experience, so right when COVID, it was one of those where like we're going to work remote for a couple of weeks, and I just had a feeling. I was like, nope, this is going to be a little bit longer.
Mhm.
But it was right before our state and local workshop, which is near and dear to my heart. So we basically have state association leaders from
Mhm.
all across the country. They come together to talk about what's happening within their associations and just really creating an opportunity to learn from one another. I
Mhm.
just love workshops in general because it's not as formal as a conference and you can
Mhm.
have a little bit more fun with it. Um, and it's really about those key takeaways. Everything I should have known when everything was planned out perfectly, like several months in advance. Like
Mhm.
we were like, wow, this is really easy. Everything numbers look great. And I was
Mhm.
like, too good to be true.
Mhm.
And so it was really hard having to um, pull back from that, we were also going to do our first diversity and inclusion business roundtable. We had people signed up, everything was set
Hmm.
up, and but obviously safety comes first. I
Yeah.
mean, of course. Um, but again, it was a little bit sad, and I'm sure that others can share in that experience where you've been planning and putting so much time and energy into something, and to
Hmm.
see it shift drastically.
Hmm.
So with our state and local workshop, we still saw that there was a need for our state and local partners to kind of come together. They were also canceling conferences,
Yeah.
trying to figure out the new normal, and so we started our coffee talks virtual series. And so the goal behind that was that we would have an hour and a half long sessions where state and local leaders would select topics that they wanted to focus on. A lot of it has been around conferences, developing pricing structures. Should it
Hmm.
be free? Should we charge? Um, Also still being able to provide that member value add virtually. What does that
Hmm.
look like? And so we've had a lot of really fruitful discussions from that. And I've also started our diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners coffee talk series. So that was a way
Hmm.
for MBA has a diversity and inclusion advisory committee, and we do content and programming through our D&I webinar series and some of our
Hmm.
other programs and resources that we provide. But for the practitioners that are on the ground doing the job in and out, really, especially in adapting to COVID and addressing the murder of George Floyd, and
Hmm.
just constantly being having to respond to a lot of things that were happening within society. We knew it was important to have a space for practitioners to come
Hmm.
together, share what they're learning with each other in a similar workshop format. But just know that they had a space where they were heard,
Yeah.
and they were recognized. I mean, honestly, DEI is not only head work, it's also heart work.
Yeah.
And it oftentimes goes without recognition or thanks.
Hmm.
And so being able to have that space was really important.
Hmm.
I will also say, in our event navigating the challenges of COVID, we discussed, people who are starting new jobs in our industry without like completely virtually,
Hmm.
and never having to meet people and kind of thrown into projects.
Hmm.
Um, so how do you continue to build your brand and get comfortable when you're
Hmm.
not able to necessarily knock on someone's office?
Yeah.
We also talked about how do you translate the skills, so being able to go to conferences and network and bring in
Hmm.
clients virtually. What does that look like?
Hmm.
And a lot of our conversation was really around leveraging technology, because as you mentioned,
Yep.
you're under 40, you're young in our industry. I'm not making
Yeah.
assumptions about other generations, but young professionals, I know, for
Yeah.
me, being able to navigate Zoom and do these really fun things with different
Hmm.
technological platforms allowed me to provide a new
Yeah.
member
Hmm.
value add, not only to our members but to our
Yeah.
company. So,
I mean, if I had a dime for every time I said you're on mute in the
oh
last
yeah,
year, right? So
yes,
definitely,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. And
Hmm.
it's been a really fun and beautiful experience. I mean, Voices
Yeah.
is an example of that. We have a team
Hmm.
of very passionate people from different generations, different aspects of our company, different
Hmm.
departments coming together and trying to make this thing a reality. And so it was a lot of trial and errors, learning as we
Hmm.
go. And so I say all that to say is that there's been a lot of innovation and creativity. And so don't be afraid if you have an idea, if there's a process that you guys can improve upon or that you think might
Hmm.
streamline and help in this virtual environment, share it. Talk
Yeah.
to your manager. Continue to provide that value and that add to your company that you were already doing, and
Hmm.
don't be afraid if it looks a little bit different now
Yeah.
in the virtual
I
environment.
think you bring up an excellent point that although it's tougher than it's ever been for people to get together, and it's unclear what that looks like going forward, the need for it is higher than ever. The need for people to support each other, to work through all of the different things that are going on, COVID and non-COVID related, is a whole heck of a lot. So I always think there's going to be a place for that, and I'm very excited to see whatever that's going to look like after. Speaking of things to plug, Krystal, there's the Impact fundraiser that had just wrapped up. Is there anything else you can share about that?
So, when we're specifically talking about, is this industry an opportunity for young professionals, the opportunity for young professionals to lead, our Impact Open Doors fundraiser was a clear example of that. So, Open Source Foundation is an organization that basically provides rental and mortgage assistance for families who have a child that's sick. It allows families to take the time and resources that they need to be there for their children in need. And it's a grant, 100% a grant, and all the funds that are raised go directly towards the foundation. And so our young professionals, this is a organization that's near and dear not only to my heart, but a lot of our impact leaders. And so even in spite of COVID, took it upon ourselves to realize, okay, we can't do our fundraising like we typically do by being able to host regional events. What does this look like in a virtual environment? And so we did a whole week of virtual events. We had yoga. We had Joe Sasto, who was a Top Chef finalist for season 15.
I was in that one and I actually won the raffle. That was a lot of fun.
Yes, I remember. Yeah. We had a mixology and magic show. We had a live concert. And all of this came from our young professionals who were passionate about providing and caring for families, especially during COVID, who came together in addition to their full-time job, came up with these ideas, reached out to people, and we generated $50,000+ for families in need for Open Source Foundation. And so that is just one of the many examples of our young professionals who are leading in the industry, who have the support of leaders in the industry already. And I think it's just so important to bring up more talking about the power and the value that our young professionals bring to the real estate.
I think it's a great example of just leading by example in terms of the things you can do in this new environment to still bring people together, have conferences, have fundraisers, and do it in an engaging way. So I really hope people check that out. So I really do appreciate your time and coming on. We didn't even get to your ukulele playing and so many other things. So we are going to have you back to touch on that. Is there anything, where can people find you? Is there anything you'd like to kind of plug or promote?
Sure, I'd love to. So I've mentioned a bunch of different things, all of which would be available on MBA's website, mba.org. Especially if you're looking to learn more about our Voices series, we will be providing additional content and resources from that programming. So please be sure to connect. Also, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Krystal Marie Thomas. I know I use my full government name, but I love my name. Feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to answer any questions, share what I've learned. It's all about just continuing to be authentic, to lead, and just to really have that compassion as we're all just really navigating this new normal that we're all in.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on, and hope to have you back soon.
My pleasure, and thank you again, Jim.
Thanks for listening to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. Please like and subscribe wherever you get this podcast. If you have any ideas for upcoming episodes or would like to be a guest, please reach out to us at lendingleaders@lssoftwaresolutions.com. Hope to hear from you.